And now I want to introduce our final speaker of the morning, and it's Henry Whiteside. And Henry is from the Strengthening Families programme, which is an evidence-based approach. He's going to speak about the evidence-based approach. And Henry is the managing partner of the Lutra Group Incorporated. They're the authorised distributors, trainers and providers of implementation and training, quality assurance and evaluation services for the Strengthening Families programme. Henry is co-author with Dr. Comfort of the more recent versions of the Strengthening Families programme for other age groups, particularly the programme for 12 to 16 years and the 3 to 5 year versions, as well as the 2011 school-based universal 10-session Strengthening Families 10 to 16 years programme that is now available in group and home use DVDs. Henry has published widely and travels frequently worldwide to conduct Strengthening Family programmes, group leader training workshops with his team of international trainers. And you're very welcome to Dublin here today. It's great to have you, and we look forward to your remarks.
Perfect, thank you. I'm afraid I scarcely recognize myself in that introduction. I think of myself as an escaped history teacher, a trainer, and an accidental businessman, something I never thought I would be. I know I'm going to be preaching to the choir in many ways this morning, but if you feel you have some familiarity with Strengthening Families program, would you just raise your hand? There will be no quiz. This is not a trap. Thank you. That just gives me some sense of how much I need to dwell on any of the detail. And I want to acknowledge particularly the points both speakers made that family-based programs, desirable in themselves, don't exhaust society's obligations to change the context and the environment for families. Oh, which button? Oh, those keys, thank you. Some important points to make right away about the Strengthening Families program, and I think it's a point that Eric in particular touched on quite a bit. The Strengthening Families program is 3 skills classes. Information, education are important, but in this case they're only important as a step to doing things differently. Parenting skills, a basic parenting skill set, children's life or social or people, getting along with people skills, and family skills. There is no magic ingredient in the Strengthening Families program. There's no element or skill you've never heard of. The strengths of the program, there are 3 strengths, and 2 of them right away. It's skills-based, it's family-based, that is, it's not just in a word, that the whole family participates and they participate together. There was sort of an accidental experiment in Sweden a couple of years ago where they omitted the family program, delivered the family class, delivered the parents class in the evening and the kids class in school. And I say it's an accidental experiment. It demonstrated that when you do that, you slash the effectiveness of the program because it's not truly family involvement. These are skills for all families. They are not a special set of skills that are only appropriate for struggling parents or failing families. They are presented in a way that's meant to make them accessible to highly stressed families. Probably the length of the program at 14 sessions is the most important feature of making these skills available for higher stress families. The best way to make the point is that this program is the original SFP 611, was developed in the early 1980s. 10 years later, in the early 90s, it was adapted for general population families. They were able to keep the skills the same, aim them at slightly older kids, 10 to 14, but they were able to slash the sessions from 14 to 7. But what that meant that is important skills that would originally have been covered in 2 or 3 sessions were covered in 1 session. It assumed less resistance, greater readiness to learn. And when we say family, I think it's important to be clear. Unfortunately, in the United States, family has been politicized and seized on by the right wing, as in family values. When we say family, the Strengthening Families program doesn't assume any one kind of family. Our working definition of family is 1 or more adults with long-term responsibility for 1 or more children. It's a very open definition of family. And by parent, similarly, we mean any adult who's accepted that responsibility, whether that adult is a legal or a biological parent, a grandparent, a relative, typically an adult who's present somewhere in the house. The Strengthening Families program sure is therapeutic with a small t in the sense that it's healing, but because it's not therapy with a big T, personal disclosure is not required. We know from experience that people can go through the program, learn a tremendous amount, and save almost nothing about themselves. When this program was originally developed in the early 1980s, it was developed on a grant from the National Institute for Drug Abuse, specifically to reduce the risk of drug and alcohol in the lives of children who are at very high risk for it. In the original research grant, the children involved had one or both parents in a methadone maintenance program, so they were at very high risk for every reason you can imagine. But this program is not drug and alcohol focused. Only one lesson out of 14 addresses drugs and alcohol. The assumption behind the program was that stronger families, more capable and engaged parents, yes, would protect kids from drug and alcohol risks. But this is more like, say, strengthening the immune system rather than giving people a line of disease-specific shots down the arm. In fact, Kansas has just completed a 5-year study where they had access to archival data and demonstrated that the Strengthening Families program, something we'd always known but had no research-grade proof for, reduces child maltreatment. In fact, it reduced the time for family reunification from about 250 days to about 120 days. So this is broad spectrum prevention, not alcohol and drug focused. We have been slow to point out that what's in this for parents. What's in this for parents is family life that is less stressful and more rewarding. I think of a young woman, young mother in Washington, D.C. with 2 children, probably her early 20s. At the graduation, she stood up. When they had a chance to speak, she said, "For the first time in my life as a parent, I have peace. Things don't always go the way I want them to, but I know where I'm going. I have a plan." And we try to hold that out to parents, many of whom have forgotten that children were ever supposed to be a source of joy or satisfaction. The program has been delivered by a huge range of agencies. My next training after I return to the States will be in Louisiana in a prison for men who are about to be released after a drug treatment program. Been delivered by schools, more typically by agencies, as you have done it here in Ireland. And I want to say before I forget to make the point, I don't think there's been an implementation of SFP anywhere in the world that has been done with the depth and the thoroughness that it's been done here in Ireland. This is exemplary and exceptional. I'm truly, you know, once we had qualified a couple of Irish trainers, Rosemary and Robert O'Driscoll, Rosemary Fox and Robert O'Driscoll, SFP in Ireland was pretty well cut loose from us. We were available if people asked. We do still provide evaluation services. But the greening of SFP for Ireland has been very thorough and very successful. Like some earlier imports of beer and cheese, it's been taken to a higher level in Ireland than anywhere in the world. And I want to make this point. Every time I see a survey in the United States of, you know, who do teens with all the shrugs and the eye rolls and the deep sighs and the attitude, who do teens trust most for fill in the blank? Information about cars, dating, sex even, money, careers, school. They always list their parents first. Not the only source. Parents 50, 55, high 50s. Their friends next, 20s, mid-high 20s. After that, the media. The point is that parents potentially have a significant influence on their children if they will use it. But believing that you don't and giving up or being put off by the surface means that it will be only peer use. SFP grows out of a huge body of research on risk factors, probably the most traditional way. This is not a comprehensive list. It's certainly not rank ordered, though Sexual, emotional, or physical abuse is certainly the most severe, as does every other family-based program. But Strengthening Families program tries to address these risks and these protective factors. Again, not a comprehensive list, but hits the key points that the Strengthening Families program does address. Have to have a slide with numbers on it if I'm going to keep up with Eric and Fergal. This slide is research done much later than almost 20 years after the Strengthening Families program was developed, but it shows using something called structural equations modeling the relative weight of factors in kids' decision not to use alcohol and drugs. The width of the arrow, I won't go into the numbers, the width of the arrow shows a strong influence or a narrow influence. I would just comment that the family is a bit stronger influence for girls than for boys consistently, and that's true whether the family is healthy or toxic. Community efforts are a little bit stronger for boys than for girls, though you'll see at the bottom it's a relatively weak influence for both boys and girls. This is my favorite slide, partly because it has colored lines and looks really cool, but mostly because it shows something that I think is important. These are 6 protective factors, and this study done in 1997 shows, and this, by the way, is a normal population. This is not high risk. All 6 of these protective factors inevitably in a normal population weaken as kids get into their early teens. This tells you 2 things, that there's a time of opportunity to reach kids before they get into these whitewater years, and so I'm really pleased that Ballymun is considering using SFP 611 as well as 1216. But the best time to start with kids is always yesterday. The next best time is today. The next best time after that will be tomorrow. Is it harder to start with teens to change the way the families run? Sure. But it's better than it will be if it's put off any farther. There's an interesting characteristic up here. All of these protective factors bottom out at age 15 and begin to rise. That's hope for parents of teens. Curiously, that turns out to be the time when there is a second peak of brain plasticity. Now, I have no clinical background, but this has to have something to do with brain growth and development. By now, we're all familiar that the part of the brain that anticipates consequences isn't fully mature until our middle 20s, which explains a lot about our teenage years, doesn't it? Biological risk factors, no program is going to change those. The more we know about it, the less certain we are about saying any one factor is involved. Some kids clearly inherit greater biological risk. Those kids may need special services, but they also need, in industrial strength, what every kid needs, and that's a stable, loving, orderly family. And I do want to stress the bottom line on this slide, that more recently, some epigenetic research has made clear something very important, and that's that family environment, particularly a stressful environment, can turn on or turn off genes that will have lifelong effects on physical and emotional health. This is well demonstrated. A program like Strengthening Families does take resources to put on. Justification for committing those resources in a focused way is that the program has a track record of producing significant and lasting effects in families and children. Interestingly, and just anecdotally, we've begun to see children who went through the program early in its years with their parents are now themselves parents. And we've had some anecdotal reports that they are doing with their kids the things that their parents learned to do with them. Now, if that's really a replicable result, it's extremely encouraging. Eric spoke at some length about the concept of resiliency, and while it's important, it doesn't exhaust society's obligation. Strengthening Families program works on resiliency skills for both parents and kids. Again, there's no magic ingredient in the program. And just a slide showing the strength of some of the early research results for the Strengthening Families program. Something that occurred to me as I listened to Eric in particular in his call for rigorous research and candid and easy access of providers to those results is that good research takes money. And in a money-tight environment, it's difficult to generate that research. And it's hard, yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that. The program was developed in the early 80s, but the core of it is proven to be very durable in practice. It's difficult to accidentally knock so many corners off of it that it's not effective. Program has been used in many countries around the world. It's been used successfully in Thailand. One of my training lines is that I always say if it's been used widely and successfully in Ireland and also in Thailand, it will probably work almost anywhere. It's been adapted subsequently for some different age groups, and this year Carol Comfort, the program developer whose husband I am. That's how I got my job. What can I tell you? But it did take her about 25 years to convince me. They've recently produced a home use DVD about which Carol is very optimistic. Okay, the program in practice, in case you're not familiar with it, 3 life skills courses: parenting skills, children's life or social skills, family life skills, typically taught 1 session a week for 14 weeks. I mentioned the Swedish study at the bottom. This is the format of a typical session, and I had the good fortune to sit through an entire session at Ballymun on Tuesday night, something I rarely have a chance to do, starting with a meal, usually dinner, because that's when parents and kids are usually available. Immediately after dinner, an hour-long class, separate classes for kids and parents, followed by a shorter family period, maybe in one big group of families or perhaps 2 small, primarily where parents practice with their own kids the skills that they've learned in their first class. And incidentally, every class ends for the parents with a real home practice assignment. The cutting edge of change in the family is never going to be thinner or less painful than when they have a specific, they've heard something explained, they've seen it demonstrated, they've practiced it with their own kids, and they are given sometimes a piece of paper that's a reminder or a place to keep track or a further explanation, and encouraged, okay, try this thing, whatever it is, once or twice this week. Try to have a family meeting. Take 10 minutes to practice this skill with your kids. This is the thinnest possible leading edge of change. It's never going to be easier. The group leaders are absolutely key, and I was struck at Ballymun by what I thought of as a seasoned group, people who were experienced in working with families, who were comfortable, and who brought a lot of themselves into the training. We think personal qualities rather than specialized trainings are the real keys: sincere desire to help the families, good interpersonal skills. Some of those you learn in school, a lot of them are a product of who you are, what you've done, and of course knowing the Strengthening Families program. The program does take 2 group leaders for the parents, 2 for the kids, and a minimum of a 5th person on site as a site coordinator. And if you're beginning to add up the numbers, you can see that this, when you're providing child care and a meal, the staff or the cast for this production is not small. The program in the States typically costs about $1,000 a family to put a family through it, all expenses. And those are local expenses. Once a site is trained, there are no continuing licensing fees to the Strengthening Families program. And in a training, I'll usually make the point, what does it cost to keep someone in prison in Alabama or Massachusetts for a year? What does it cost to keep a child in detention? Now, you probably have a good idea of what those figures are in Ireland. If you keep 1 child out of detention for a year or 1 adult out of prison for the year, you've typically recovered the cost of the program 5, 10 times over. We've joked about creating a variant called Strengthening Families Overnight. It would have a 1-hour meeting and a 1-page handout. And we wait for people to ask, does that work? We say, of course not, but it's extremely inexpensive. It takes families a while to be the way they are. It takes a while to help them change. And I don't want to see the crook come out from my neck, so I'm going to keep an eye on the time. But I do want to stress that the right group leaders make a tremendous difference. The families will try these skills because the group leaders have built a relationship with them, and they personally are urging them to try them. Just because it's in a book means nothing to the families. The program requires a lot of extras, meals, assistance with transportation, childcare that do increase the cost, but make a tremendous difference in getting families there. The meal that I shared at Ballymun on Tuesday night was a good meal with lots of choice, served in quantity, and the families clearly were there to enjoy it. The course materials, this would be the third strength of the Strengthening Families program. These skills are committed to fully fleshed out lessons that are complete for every class, for every week, parent, child, or teen, and family. And they're presented in an order that makes them promising for success. So on weeks when a group leader may be lucky to have 15 minutes in the car to cram, and I know this never happens at Ballymun, you could deliver the lesson pretty much as written. But, and I'll talk something this afternoon about it, in every implementation, whether it's in Alabama or Mississippi or Utah or Montana, we stress the heavy responsibility of group leaders to adapt the language, the exercises, the wording, the way they sell these skills to the people who are sitting in front of them tonight, because nobody knows those people the way they do. Adaptation is not just something for export. The skills in the parents class, just to give you a sense of what's covered, and in 1216, parents and teens are on the same subject every week. In 611, they're on the same subject about half the time. The skills break down for the parents into a first block, goals and encouraging good behavior goals and objectives, basically helping parents understand that you can get more of the behavior you want by rewarding it when you see it. Not with money or things from the store, but with acknowledgement or recognition, praise, and approval. Yes, there's a place for token rewards and occasionally for tangible rewards. Many parents have a very limited skill set. Their understanding of parenting is punishment. When they do the wrong thing, you smack them and tell them to do the right thing. That's a parenting skill, but by itself, it's a pretty limited skill, and increasingly not even acceptable in most countries. Second block is communication for both parents and teens. The third block down at the bottom, the thing parents thought they were coming to the class to get, is setting limits. What do you do when there's behavior that's not okay in your household? The lessons that fill in around that, that's roughly half the class. The lessons that fill in around it address particular topics: alcohol, drugs, and families, relationships, love, and sexuality, which is not a plumbing lesson. It's about getting parents and teens to talk to each other about the meaning or value of sexuality as their family understands it. It gives you a good sense of what the program does in practice. And in the interest of having lots of time for discussion, it's my last slide. Thank you very much.